Well, howdy again everyone. Today I'm testing out a fisheye lens that's designed for mirrorless cameras with an aps-c sized sensor. So that's Fuji X cameras, Samyang NX, Sony E mount cameras and Canon EOS M mirrorless cameras. I'm taking a look at the Samyang 8mm f2.8 fisheye Mark II. This lens is designed for mirrorless cameras only and not digital SLRs. The digital SLR version of this lens has a maximum aperture of f3.5 and is quite a bit larger. This mirrorless version has a maximum aperture of f2.8, so it manages to let in a lot more light despite being much smaller. I've been really looking forward to testing this one out on my mirrorless Canon EOS M3. Samyang's fisheye lenses have a special projection pattern, which means that they squeeze in a bit more field on the horizontal and vertical axes, making them a bit wider angle than their competitors, and yet the spacing of the image is quite even, without any big pinch in the middle. This leaves you with pleasantly balanced and extremely wide fisheye images, which are particularly fun when shooting indoors or shooting interesting architecture. Fisheye images can carry quite an impact, and it's an enjoyable challenge to use a lens like this to its maximum potential, as you'll have to frame your images just right. It's not a piece of equipment you'll be using all the time, so thankfully this lens can be found new for only about £250. Depending on its quality, that could be really quite reasonable, so let's take a closer look. The first thing you notice about the lens is that it's lovely and small, very small in fact. It weighs about 300 grams, so it's neither light nor heavy, but it does feel very nice and solid. Like with all fisheye lenses, there's no way of attaching any screw-in filters to the front. It has a permanent, thick plastic lens hood there. It's a fully manual lens, manual aperture and manual focus, so there's no electronic contact with the camera at all. For a lens with such a wide angle, manually focusing really is no trouble at all. Even a beginner would get the hang of it in no time. The manual focus ring works extremely smoothly and is very nicely damped. The aperture ring also works very nicely. Despite having clear indents at every half a stop of aperture, it still turns quite smoothly. The whole lens is built around a metal mount and feels like a very tough, high-quality instrument. It comes with a free lens pouch and small front and rear lens caps. Overall, it's a bit of a dream to use and carry around with you. I love the lens's small size, despite its good maximum aperture of f2.8. Let's see about image quality then. I've abandoned my usual test chart this time, as it doesn't really work with fisheye lenses, and I'm testing on a 24 megapixel Canon EOS M3. Straight from f2.8, we see a very sharp image indeed in the middle of the picture, with good colours and reasonable contrast. Over in the corners, the image is very slightly softer but still very good. Also, we're not seeing much in the way of vignetting, and impressively, there's not too much chromatic aberration, which normally blights fisheye lenses. Stop the aperture down to f4 and we see great sharpness in the corners and more contrast, and back in the middle we see razor sharp resolution. This is actually a lot sharper than Samyang's fisheye lens for digital SLR cameras, and this image is taken on a challenging 24 megapixel sensor, so kudos. Stop down to f5.6 and that excellent resolution now stretches from the middle into the corners, and it also looks like chromatic aberration is slightly reduced. So at f5.6 and f8, this is the sweet spot for the lens. When we stop down to f11, diffraction starts coming in as expected, and at f16 on a 24 megapixel sensor, the image becomes soft. Still, diffraction is pretty universal. The performance of this Samyang lens is basically excellent. It's very sharp indeed, and we're seeing less colour fringing than we normally do on competing fisheye lenses, so this is clearly a high performance lens. When it comes to distortion, well, of course there is deliberate fisheye distortion. Here's my test chart to prove it, if you don't believe me somehow. What's pleasing to see is that there isn't any particularly noticeable vignetting in this or indeed any of the test pictures I took, even at f2.8. Let's see now how the lens works against bright light, an important question for any wide-angle optic. When the sun is directly in a picture, we see very small specks of flaring patterns, but little loss of contrast, so this is quite a good performance. This fisheye lens has really impressed me so far, but it has one slight weakness. It can only focus as closely as about 30 centimeters, which isn't really very close at all, as you can see here. That's a bit of a shame, as close focusing is particularly fun with a fisheye lens. But at least the close-up picture quality remains very good, as you can see. Overall, I am extremely impressed with the Samyang 8mm f2.8 Mark II. It's one of the most enjoyable and accomplished little devices I've reviewed in a long time. I bought a copy of it myself for testing, with the intention of selling it on again afterwards, but upon taking it out for some landscape photography, I quickly decided I'd be keeping it. Its build quality and small size make me smile, and it's also good value for money. If you own a mirrorless camera with an aps-c sized sensor, then this lens really is a no-brainer. Just go out and get one and have fun, as it comes highly recommended.